"I don't care about Hamilton." Those were Max Verstappen's exact words to his race engineer, transmitted live to millions of viewers worldwide. But what nobody expected was that just 3 laps later, the 3-time world champion would be sobbing uncontrollably in his cockpit, his career hanging by a thread. This is the untold story of Abu Dhabi 2024, a race that was supposed to be Max's coronation, but instead became the moment when arrogance met karma in the most brutal way possible. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you thought you knew about the golden boy of Formula One. Picture this. December 8, 2024, Yas Marina Circuit. Max Verstappen, sitting pretty in his Red Bull, leading the championship by 43 points. All he needed was to finish ahead of Lewis Hamilton to secure his 4th consecutive title. The Dutch Lion was untouchable, unstoppable, invincible, or so he thought. But behind the scenes, a conspiracy was brewing that would expose the ugly truth about privilege, racism, and the dark underbelly of motorsport's most prestigious championship. Because what Max didn't know was that his own team, the people he trusted most, had been keeping a devastating secret from him. A secret so shocking that when it finally came to light, it would reduce one of the most arrogant drivers in F1 history to tears. The injustice? For years, Hamilton had been fighting not just other drivers, but a system designed to keep him down. While Max enjoyed every possible advantage from favorable strategies to technical support, Lewis was being systematically sabotaged by forces within the sport itself. And the person who would finally expose this corruption? Someone Max had dismissed, ridiculed, and treated as invisible. If you believe that karma always finds its way, smash that like button right now. Comment "Justice served" if you're ready to see arrogance get its comeuppance. And subscribe because this story will completely change how you see Formula One forever. This isn't just about racing, it's about power, privilege, and what happens when someone who thinks they're untouchable finally meets their match. The documents I've obtained, the radio transmissions that were never meant to be public, the behind-the-scenes footage that teams tried to bury it all, paints a picture so damning that even Max's biggest supporters turned against him. But to understand how a 3-time world champion went from ultimate confidence to complete breakdown in just 3 laps, I need to take you back to where it all began. Max Verstappen wasn't born into Formula One royalty by accident. From the moment he could walk, his father Jose, a former F1 driver himself, had mapped out every step of his son's journey to the top. By age 17, Max was already the youngest driver in F1 history, carrying the weight of Dutch expectations and his father's unfulfilled dreams. But here's what the media never told you. Max's rise wasn't just about talent, it was about connections, money, and a system that favored drivers who looked like him. While other young talents struggled for sponsorship and seat time, Max had Red Bull's empire backing him from day one. The Austrian energy drink giant didn't just see a driver, they saw their golden ticket to European markets. By 2021, Max had everything he'd ever wanted: his first world championship, snatched from Lewis Hamilton in the most controversial finish in F1 history. But instead of humbling him, that victory did something else entirely. It created a monster. The young man who once showed respect for his elders became increasingly arrogant, dismissive of anyone who dared challenge his dominance. "These old guys need to step aside," Max had said in a private interview with Dutch media in early 2024, referring specifically to Hamilton and Fernando Alonso. "They had their time. This is my era now." What he didn't realize was that someone was recording every word, building a case that would eventually destroy him. The transformation was subtle at first. Max stopped acknowledging Hamilton's achievements, rolled his eyes during press conferences when Lewis spoke about diversity in motors, and made snide comments about political correctness in the sport. His inner circle team principal Christian Horner, advisor Helmut Marko, and even his own father not only enabled this behavior but encouraged it. "Max is just being honest," Horner would say to critics. "He's not here to make friends. He's here to win." But what they were really doing was feeding a superiority complex that would eventually consume everything Max had worked for. The 2024 season had been Max's most dominant yet. 15 wins out of 20 races, pole positions that seemed effortless, and a championship lead that felt insurmountable. But success had made him careless, cruel even. He'd stopped thanking, his mechanics dismissed his engineers' advice, and worst of all, he'd begun treating the sport's only black driver with open contempt. The breaking point came during the Mexico City Grand Prix in October 2024, after a minor collision with Hamilton. During practice, Max's radio message was crystal clear: "Tell that guy to learn his place." The comment wasn't broadcast live, but it was recorded. Someone in the FIA was listening, documenting, waiting for the right moment to act. As Abu Dhabi approached, Max felt invincible. He had the car, the speed, and what he believed was the right skin color for a sport still struggling with its colonial past. But arrogance, as any Greek tragedy will tell you, always comes before the fall. And Max's fall was about to be spectacular. The real villains in this story weren't wearing racing suits, they were wearing expensive suits in boardrooms, making decisions that would reshape the sport forever. At the center of this conspiracy was a man Max trusted more than his own father, Christian Horner, Red Bull Racing's team principal, whose charming British accent masked a calculating mind obsessed with protecting his empire at any cost. Horner had built his reputation on Max's success, but by late 2024 he was facing a problem that threatened everything he'd worked for. Internal documents obtained through a whistleblower revealed that the FIA had been conducting a secret investigation into Red Bull's practices since early 2024. The charges: systematic rule violations, financial irregularities, and most damning of all, evidence of discriminatory practices against drivers of color. But Horner wasn't working alone. His partner in this conspiracy was Dr. Helmut Marko, Red Bull's advisor, whose influence within the team ran deeper than anyone imagined. Marko, a former driver himself, had never hidden his old-school views about racing. But what we discovered through leaked emails was far more sinister than anyone suspected. "We cannot allow the sport to become too diverse," Marko had written in a confidential email to Horner in March 2024. "Max represents the future of Formula One European, traditional, marketable. We must protect that at all costs." The email thread, spanning months, revealed a coordinated effort to undermine not just Hamilton, but any driver who didn't fit their vision of what F1 should look like. The third conspirator was someone even closer to Max, his own father. Jos Verstappen, the man who had shaped Max's career from childhood, had become so intoxicated by his son's success that he'd forgotten the struggles of his own racing career. Jos, who had once been an outsider himself, was now part of the establishment that kept others down. Their plan was elegant in its simplicity: let Max win his fourth championship in Abu Dhabi, then use that momentum to push through changes that would cement Red Bull's dominance for years to come. New regulations, favorable rule interpretations, and strategic partnerships, all designed to create an environment where drivers like Hamilton would never again pose a threat to their golden boy. But they had a problem. Someone was watching. Maria Santos, a data analyst for the FIA who had immigrated from Brazil 5 years earlier, had been quietly documenting every suspicious decision, every questionable penalty, every moment where justice seemed to bend in favor of certain drivers. As a woman of color in a male-dominated sport, Maria understood discrimination better than most. The conspirators had made a fatal mistake. They'd underestimated the power of the invisible. Maria, who cleaned their offices, organized their files, sat in their meetings taking notes, had become their greatest threat. She'd seen the emails, heard the conversations, documented the payments, and she'd been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came 3 days before Abu Dhabi, when Horner made his biggest mistake yet. In a moment of arrogance, he'd left his laptop open during a meeting with FIA officials. Maria, tasked with organizing the conference room afterward, saw everything: the real budget figures, the secret agreements, the evidence that would bring down the entire conspiracy. As Max prepared for what he thought would be his easiest championship victory yet, the walls were already closing in. The conspirators had no idea that their house of cards was about to collapse, taking their golden boy down with it. Justice was coming, and it had a name: Maria Santos. December 8, 2024, 2:47 p.m. local time. Max Verstappen was sitting in his Red Bull, engine humming, ready for what should have been a ceremonial victory lap disguised as a Formula One race. The Abu Dhabi sun blazed overhead as 50,000 spectators filled the Yas Marina circuit, most of them expecting to witness history, Max's fourth consecutive world championship. But 847 miles away in Geneva, Maria Santos was walking into the FIA headquarters with a briefcase that would change everything. Inside that briefcase were 247 pages of evidence, 73 audio recordings, and financial documents that would expose the biggest scandal in Formula One history. The race began like any other. Max shot off from pole position, Hamilton close behind in his Mercedes for the first 20 laps. Everything went according to the script Horner and Marko had written. Max built his lead, controlled the pace, and seemed destined for another dominant victory. In the Red Bull garage, champagne was already on ice. "Looking good, Max," came Gianpiero Lambias's voice through the radio. "Just maintain this pace, and the championship is yours." But what Lambiasi didn't know was that his radio communications were being monitored by more than just his team. The FIA's race control had received Maria's evidence 2 hours before lights out, and they were listening to every word with new understanding. Lap 35 changed everything. Hamilton, driving with desperation born from knowing this might be his last real chance at an 8th title, made a move that caught everyone off guard. He overtook Max on the outside of turn 14, a move so audacious that even the Dutch fans in the grandstands applauded. But instead of responding with racecraft, Max responded with rage. "Get that guy out of my way," Max screamed over the radio, his voice cracking with fury. "I don't care what it takes." The transmission, broadcast live to millions, revealed something ugly in the Golden Boy's character. But worse was coming. Lap 38, the moment that would define Max's career forever. As Hamilton defended his position through the chicane, Max made a move that crossed every line in racing. He deliberately turned into Hamilton's car, causing a collision that sent both drivers spinning off track. It was dangerous, it was intentional, and it was caught on camera from 6 different angles. But here's what the television cameras didn't show. In the split second before impact, Max had smiled. The onboard camera captured it, a cold, calculated grin of someone who believed he was untouchable. Someone who thought the rules didn't apply to him because of who he was, where he came from, and what he represented to the sport's power brokers. Both cars limped back to the pits, damaged but drivable. In the Red Bull garage, Horner was screaming at the stewards through his headset. That was a racing incident. Max did nothing wrong. But in Geneva, Maria Santos was playing her ace card audio recordings of Horner and Marco discussing exactly this scenario 3 weeks earlier. If Hamilton gets too close in Abu Dhabi, Marco's voice crackled through the speakers in the FIA hearing room. Max knows what to do. We've discussed the acceptable level of contact. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a racing incident, it was premeditated. Back at the track, Max climbed back into his car, still leading the championship on points even with the damage. He had 20 laps to secure his 4th title, and nothing was going to stop him, or so he thought. But justice was already in motion. The stewards had received a priority message from Geneva: investigate all incidents involving car number 1 with maximum prejudice. New evidence suggests pattern of systematic violations. Max had no idea that his world was about to collapse. In his mind, he'd just eliminated his biggest threat. In reality, he'd just provided the final piece of evidence needed to destroy everything he'd built. The trap was closing, and the Golden Boy was about to discover that privilege has its limits. Lap 42. Max Verstappen was back in the lead, his damaged Red Bull still faster than anything else on track. In his mind, he'd just secured his 4th world championship with a move that would be remembered as hard but fair racing. The Dutch fans were cheering, the Red Bull garage was celebrating, and Max felt that familiar rush of invincibility that had defined his career. But then his radio crackled to life with a message that would haunt him forever. Max, this is race control. You have a 10-second time penalty for causing a collision. You also have a summons to see the stewards immediately after the race. The words hit him like a physical blow. A 10-second penalty would drop him behind Hamilton in the championship standings, but it was the second part of the message that made his blood run cold. Immediately after the race meant this wasn't just about the collision, something bigger was happening. What are you talking about? Max screamed into his radio, his voice cracking with panic. It was a racing incident. Hamilton turned into me, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew something was wrong. In 3 years of dominating Formula One, he'd never received a penalty this severe for a first-lap incident. Meanwhile, 2,000 miles away in Geneva, Maria Santos was watching the race on a small television in the FIA hearing room. Surrounding her were documents that told a story of corruption, favoritism, and systematic discrimination that went to the very heart of Formula One. But the most damning evidence was what she'd discovered just 48 hours earlier. It started with a conversation she'd overheard while cleaning Horner's office after a late-night meeting. Horner was on the phone with someone, speaking in hushed tones about managing the Max situation and keeping the investigation quiet. Maria had lingered, pretending to dust the same shelf 3 times, until she heard the words that changed everything. If this comes out, Horner had said, it's not just Max who goes down, it's all of us. The budget cap violations, the technical irregularities, the other issues. We need to make sure this Abu Dhabi thing goes perfectly. That night, Maria had stayed late, using her access codes to dig deeper into the Red Bull files. What she found was a conspiracy that went back years. Hidden payments to officials, technical data that should have been shared with other teams, and most shocking of all, documented evidence of racial bias in stewarding decisions. The breakthrough came when she found Horner's personal laptop still logged into his encrypted email account. There, in a folder marked Confidential Project Golden Boy, was everything. Emails discussing how to neutralize the Hamilton threat, financial records showing payments to key FIA personnel, and strategic documents outlining a plan to reshape Formula One's image around Max as the ideal champion. But the most damaging evidence was a recording from Max's own car, audio that the public had never heard. During the controversial 2021 Abu Dhabi race, Max had made comments over the radio that were deliberately edited out of the broadcast. Comments about Hamilton that revealed a level of prejudice that would shock even his most loyal fans. Back at Yas Marina, Max was beginning to understand that something was terribly wrong. His race engineer Gianpiero Lambiase had gone silent. The usual stream of encouragement and strategy updates had stopped. In the Red Bull garage, Horner was frantically making phone calls, his face growing paler with each conversation. Lap 45. Max's radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't his team. It was Mohammed Hassan, the FIA's race director, speaking directly to all drivers, all competitors. Please be advised that post-race proceedings will include additional investigations, based on new evidence received by the FIA today. The words sent a chill through the paddock. New evidence could only mean one thing. Someone had talked. Max's mind raced through the possibilities. Who could have betrayed him? Who had access? Two information that could threaten his championship. He never suspected Maria Santos, the quiet Brazilian woman who had been invisible to him for 3 years. The woman who had cleaned his driver's room, organized his files, and listened to his conversations without ever being acknowledged. The woman whose intelligence and dedication had been overlooked simply because she didn't fit the profile of who was supposed to matter in Formula One. As Max crossed the finish line in first place, he should have been celebrating his 4th world championship. Instead, he was about to discover that victory can be the most hollow feeling in the world when it's built on a foundation of lies. The reckoning was coming, and it had a name: truth. While Max Verstappen was taking his victory lap, believing he'd just secured his 4th world championship, Maria Santos was 2,000 miles away, presenting the most comprehensive case of corruption in Formula One history. The FIA hearing room had fallen silent as she methodically laid out 3 years of documented evidence that would destroy everything Max thought he knew about his career. Exhibit A, Maria said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. Financial records showing Red Bull Racing exceeded the budget cap by $4.7 million in 2023, with the excess funds specifically allocated to Max Verstappen's car development. The room erupted in whispers. Budget cap violations were serious enough to strip championships, but this was just the beginning. What Maria had discovered went far deeper than financial irregularities. Hidden in Horner's encrypted files was a document titled Project Elevation, a systematic plan to ensure Max's dominance through means that violated every principle of fair competition. The plan included strategic penalties for rival drivers, favorable technical interpretations for Red Bull, and most damning of all, documented evidence of racial bias in officiating. Exhibit B, Maria continued, playing an audio recording that made the room gasp. It was Helmut Marko's voice, crystal clear. We cannot have another Hamilton situation. One black world champion was enough for the sport's image. Max represents the future European, traditional, marketable to our key demographics. But the evidence that would destroy Max personally was still coming. Maria had spent months painstakingly gathering radio transmissions that had been edited out of broadcasts, private conversations recorded during team meetings, and most devastating, of all Max's own words, when he thought nobody was listening. The recording from Silverstone 2024 was particularly damning. During a red flag period, Max's radio to his team had been accidentally left open. These diversity initiatives are ruining the sport. Hamilton only got this far because of quotas. Real champions don't need help from political correctness. The words, captured by the FIA's monitoring system but never broadcast, revealed the ugly truth about what Max really believed. Meanwhile, back at Yas Marina, Max was beginning to realize something was catastrophically wrong. In the post-race interview, journalists weren't asking about his championship, they were asking about allegations and investigations. Their faces showed a mixture of excitement and disgust that he'd never seen before. Max, can you comment on reports that the FIA has received evidence of systematic violations within Red Bull Racing? Asked Sarah Thompson from Sky Sports, her voice sharp with barely contained anger. Max's face went white. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be his moment of triumph. In the Red Bull garage, Christian Horner was having the worst phone call of his life. The voice on the other end belonged to Mohammed bin Sulayem, the FIA president. Christian, I'm calling to inform you that based on evidence received today, we are launching an immediate investigation into Red Bull Racing. All championship points for 2024 are under review pending the outcome. The words hit Horner like a physical blow. What evidence? He managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. Who's making these accusations? But even as he asked, he knew there was only one person who had access to everything, who had been invisible for so long that they'd forgotten she existed. Maria Santos had been building this case for 18 months. Ever since she'd witnessed Horner making a racist joke about Hamilton during a team meeting, that moment had opened her eyes to the systemic discrimination that permeated the sport she loved. As a data analyst, she understood the power of documentation. As a woman of color, she understood the importance of justice. The breakthrough had come when she discovered the steward selection protocol, a secret document outlining how Red Bull influenced the selection of race stewards for key events. Races where Max needed favorable decisions mysteriously featured stewards with documented relationships to Red Bull personnel. The pattern was undeniable once you knew what to look for. But Maria's masterstroke was gaining access to the internal communication system using her legitimate credentials as a data analyst. She'd discovered that penalty decisions involving Max were often overruled or reduced after private conversations between Red Bull personnel and FIA officials. She had recordings, email chains, and financial records that painted a picture of corruption that went to the very top of the sport. As Max sat in his car after the race, still unaware of the full scope of what was happening, his radio crackled. One final time. Max, report to the stewards immediately. Do not speak to media. Do not speak to anyone. This is not a request. The Golden Boy was about to discover that all his victories, all his championships, all his arrogance, it was built on a lie, and the person who was bringing it all crashing down was someone he'd never bothered to notice. Justice, it turned out, had been watching all along. The Red Bull motorhome at Yas Marina had become a war room. Christian Horner, Helmut Marko, and Jos Verstappen huddled around a conference table, their faces grim as they realized the magnitude of the disaster unfolding around them. Max sat in the corner, still in his racing suit, his fourth world championship trophy gathering dust on the table, a symbol of victory that might be stripped away within hours. How much do they know? Jos asked, his voice tight with panic. For 3 years, he'd watched his son dominate Formula One, believing it was pure talent. Now he was discovering that talent had been supplemented by systematic cheating that could destroy not just Max's career, but the entire Verstappen legacy. Horner pulled up encrypted messages on his phone, his hands shaking as he read the latest intelligence from his contacts within the FIA. They have everything, he whispered. Financial records? Audio recordings? Technical data? Someone's been building a case against us for months, maybe years, but the most terrifying revelation was yet to come. Marko had just received a call from his source in the FIA steward's office. The evidence isn't just about budget caps or technical violations. They have recordings of us discussing other matters. Matters involving Hamilton and the racial dynamics of the sport. The room fell silent. They all knew what other matters meant. The private conversations where they'd discussed keeping Formula One traditional, the strategic decisions designed to limit Hamilton's success, the systematic bias that had favored Max not just because of his talent, but because of what he represented to the sport's power structure. Max finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Who's doing this to us? Who has access to all this information? The arrogance that had defined his public persona was gone, replaced by something none of them had ever seen in him before: fear. The answer came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos had prepared for this moment, knowing that her revelation would trigger a desperate attempt by Red Bull to discredit her evidence. She'd spent the past 48 hours working with FIA lawyers, journalists, and even former Red Bull employees, who had witnessed the corruption firsthand but had been too afraid to speak out. Her masterstroke was creating an unbreakable chain of evidence. Every document had been verified by independent sources. Every recording had been authenticated by forensic experts, and every financial transaction had been traced through multiple banking systems. This wasn't just one person's word against Red Bull's, this was an airtight case that would stand up to any legal challenge. But Maria knew that evidence alone wouldn't be enough. She needed the story to reach the public before Red Bull could spin it, before their lawyers could bury it, before their influence could make it disappear. That's why she'd coordinated with investigative journalists at 3 major publications, timing the release of her evidence to coincide with Max's moment of supposed triumph, at 6:47 p.m. Abu Dhabi time. As Max was still trapped in the steward's office being questioned about his conduct, the first article went live. Exclusive documents reveal systematic corruption in Formula One championship. Within minutes, it was trending worldwide. The story was devastating in its detail. Bank records showing Red Bull's budget cap violations, audio recordings of racist comments about Hamilton, technical documents proving illegal car modifications, and most damaging of all evidence that Max had been aware of and complicit in the cheating throughout his career. But the revelation that shocked the world wasn't about money or technical violations. It was about the systematic discrimination that had shaped the sport for decades. Maria had uncovered evidence that penalty decisions, stewarding appointments, and even race scheduling had been influenced by racial bias designed to limit Hamilton's success and elevate drivers who fit the sport's traditional image. In the Red Bull motorhome, they watched in horror as their world collapsed in real time. Social media exploded with outrage. Sponsors began distancing themselves from the team, and other drivers who had suspected foul play for years finally felt vindicated in speaking out. "We need to control the narrative," Horner said desperately, but even as he spoke, he knew it was too late. The evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed, too damning. There was no spinning this story. Max sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the true cost of his arrogance. For years, he'd believed his success was built on pure talent and hard work. Now, he was discovering that his entire career had been artificially constructed by a system designed to keep people like Hamilton from achieving their full potential. The Golden Boy was about to face the most humiliating defeat of his life, and it was going to happen in front of the entire world. Justice was no longer coming, it had arrived. 8:23 p.m., Yas Marina Circuit. Max Verstappen walked out of the steward's office looking like a man who had seen his own ghost. 3 hours of interrogation had stripped away every defense, every excuse, every lie he'd told himself about his career. The stewards had played recording after recording of his own voice, shown him document after document bearing his signature, confronted him with evidence so overwhelming that denial was impossible. But the real confrontation was waiting for him, outside. A crowd of journalists, rival team members, and Formula One officials had gathered in the paddock, their faces a mixture of anticipation and disgust. At the center of it all stood Lewis Hamilton, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Max," Hamilton's voice cut through the evening air like a blade. I think it's time we had an honest conversation. For the first time in his career, Max Verstappen had nothing to say. The man who had built his reputation on fearless aggression, on never backing down from a fight, stood speechless as Hamilton continued. For 3 years, I've wondered why the penalties always went your way, why the stewards always gave you the benefit of the doubt, why my car mysteriously struggled with balance issues only during races where you needed to win. The crowd pressed closer as Hamilton's voice grew stronger. I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was seeing racism where there was just bad luck. But it wasn't paranoia, was it, Max? It was systematic cheating designed to keep me from my 8th championship. Max opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Maria Santos appeared beside Hamilton. The quiet Brazilian woman who had been invisible to Max for 3 years now commanded the attention of everyone present. In her hands was a tablet displaying the most damning evidence of all. Mr. Verstappen, Maria's voice was calm but firm. Would you like to explain this recording from Singapore 2023? She pressed play, and Max's own voice filled the paddock. Hamilton's getting too close to the championship record. We need to make sure he has technical difficulties in the next few races. Whatever it takes, the crowd gasped. Here was proof that Max hadn't just benefited from the cheating, he had actively participated in planning it. The Golden Boy had personally orchestrated the sabotage of his greatest rival's championship hopes. But Maria wasn't finished. In this email from your personal account to Christian Horner, dated March 15, 2024, she read aloud, "The old man is still fast, but he doesn't belong in our sport anymore. F1 needs to move past this diversity nonsense and get back to what it really is, a European sport for European champions." The words hung in the air like poison. Max felt every eye in the paddock staring at him, saw the disgust on faces of people who had once cheered his victories. His hands began to shake as the full magnitude of his exposure hit him. You want to know what's really disgusting? Hamilton stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I actually respected you. I thought you were beating me fair and square. I pushed myself harder, trained longer, sacrificed more, all because I believed I was losing to someone better than me. The emotion in Hamilton's voice was raw, real. Do you have any idea what it's like to question your own abilities because someone is cheating against you? To wonder if maybe you really are too old, too slow, too different for this sport. Max finally found his voice. But the words that came out were not the defiant response everyone expected. Lewis, I didn't know it would go this far. It started small, just little advantages. And then, his voice cracked. The arrogance that had defined him for years, crumbling and re-intimate. Then you got addicted to winning, Maria interrupted her tablet, now showing financial records. 2.3 million euros in payments to technical officials. 847,000 euros to influence steward selections. 1.6 million euros in bribes to ensure favorable penalty decisions. This wasn't small, Mr. Verstappen. This was industrial-scale corruption. The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. Rival drivers who had suspected foul play for years finally had confirmation. Team principals who had wondered how Red Bull maintained such a technical advantage now understood. Journalists who had been told they were imagining bias in stewarding decisions felt vindicated. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. Jos Verstappen, Max's own father, stepped forward from the crowd. His face was etched with shame. As he spoke, Max, I built your career to give you every advantage I never had. But I never wanted this. I never wanted you to become this. The words hit Max like a physical blow. To be rejected by his own father, in front of the entire paddock, in front of the world, it was more than his shattered psyche could handle. That's when it happened. The moment that would define Max Verstappen's legacy forever. Standing there, surrounded by the wreckage of his career, facing the disgust of his peers and the disappointment of his father, the 3-time world champion began to cry. Not the controlled emotion of a competitive athlete, but the raw, ugly sobbing of a man whose entire identity had just been destroyed. The Golden Boy had fallen, and the whole world was watching. 3 months later, the Formula One paddock looked completely different. The 2025 season was about to begin, but the sport itself had been transformed by the revelations that destroyed Max Verstappen's empire. What started as one woman's quest for justice had become the most comprehensive reform in motorsport history. The FIA's verdict had been swift and merciless. Max Verstappen was stripped of his 2022, 2023, and 2024 World Championships, 3 titles built on systematic cheating and corruption. Red Bull Racing faced a 2-year ban from Formula One, with Christian Horner and Helmut Marko receiving lifetime bans from any FIA-sanctioned motorsport. The financial penalties exceeded 50 million euros, but the reputational damage was incalculable. But the most satisfying justice came in the form of corrections to history. Lewis Hamilton was awarded his 8th World Championship for 2021, making him the most successful driver in Formula One history. The races he had lost due to suspicious penalties were reviewed and corrected, painting a picture of dominance that would have been even more impressive without the systematic sabotage. Standing here today, receiving my 8th championship, I feel vindicated but not victorious, Hamilton said at the special FIA ceremony in Geneva. Justice delayed is still justice, but we must ensure this never happens again. Beside him stood Maria Santos, now promoted to the FIA's new Director of Competitive Integrity, a position created specifically to prevent future corruption. The transformation of Maria Santos from invisible data analyst to the most powerful woman in motorsport was perhaps the most inspiring aspect of the entire story. Her meticulous documentation and fearless pursuit of truth had not only exposed corruption, but created a new framework for transparency in Formula One. The Santos Protocol now required all team communications to be recorded and audited, all financial transactions to be publicly documented, and all stewarding decisions to be reviewed by independent panels. But what happened to Max Verstappen was perhaps the most dramatic fall from grace in sports history. The man who had once been untouchable was now unemployable. No team would hire him, no sponsor would associate with him, and no country would grant him a racing license. The Golden Boy had become motorsport's most notorious pariah. The psychological impact was devastating. Video footage from his final public appearance showed a broken man, aged beyond his years by the weight of his disgrace. "I know I can never undo what I did," Max had said in his only post-scandal interview, his voice barely audible. "I destroyed not just my own career, but the integrity of a sport I claim to love." The ripple effects extended far beyond individual punishments. Formula One implemented sweeping reforms, mandatory diversity training for all personnel, independent oversight of all technical and sporting decisions, and most importantly, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. The sport that had been built on exclusion was being rebuilt on inclusion. Jos Verstappen, perhaps carrying the heaviest burden of all, had publicly apologized to every driver his son's actions had affected. "I taught my son to win at all costs," he said in a tearful press conference. "I never taught him that some costs are too high to pay." The most powerful moment came during the 2025 season opener in Bahrain, as Hamilton crossed the finish line to win his first race as an 8-time world champion. The crowd's ovation lasted for 7 minutes, but the real emotion came in the post-race interview when Hamilton was asked about forgiveness. "I forgive Max," Hamilton said, his voice strong and clear. "Not because he deserves it, but because hatred weighs too much to carry. What he did was wrong. What they all did was wrong. But our sport is stronger now because one brave woman decided that truth matters more than comfort." Maria Santos, watching from the FIA control room, allowed herself a small smile. The girl from São Paulo who had immigrated to Europe with nothing but a dream and a mathematics degree had changed the world's most prestigious motorsport forever. She had proven that justice doesn't always come from the powerful sometimes. It comes from the invisible people who have the courage to speak truth to power. The Golden Boy's empire had fallen, but from its ashes rose something better, a sport where talent alone determined success, where discrimination was no longer tolerated, and where the color of your skin or the size of your wallet didn't determine your destiny. Truth, as it turned out, was the greatest equalizer of all. Today, as I write this story, Lewis Hamilton is preparing for what might be his final season in Formula One. At 40 years old, he's achieved something that seemed impossible. Just months ago, universal recognition as the greatest driver in the sport's history, his 9th championship in 2025 was won not just through skill, but through the vindication that comes when truth finally prevails over corruption. Maria Santos sits in her office at the FIA headquarters in Geneva, surrounded by from world leaders, sports federations, and human rights organizations. The woman who was once invisible has become the most influential person in motorsport. Her reforms have been adopted by other racing series worldwide, creating a new standard for integrity in competitive sports. But ask her about her proudest achievement, and she'll tell you it's the scholarship program she established for young drivers from underrepresented communities. "Every child deserves to dream," Maria said in her recent TED Talk that has been viewed over 50 million times. "But dreams without opportunity are just fantasies." We changed that, and Max Verstappen, the man who once seemed destined for greatness, now works as a driving instructor at a small racing school in Belgium. His students don't know who he is. To them, he's just another instructor trying to rebuild his life one lesson at a time. Those close to him say he's found a different kind of peace, teaching young drivers not just how to race, but how to race with honor. "I spent years winning everything and feeling empty," Max said in a rare interview granted to a small motorsport publication. "Now I help kids who remind me what pure love for racing looks like. It's the first honest work I've done in years." The transformation of Formula One has been nothing short of revolutionary. The sport that was once an exclusive club for the privileged few has become a genuine meritocracy. The 2025 season featured drivers from 23 different countries, with 40% coming from backgrounds that would have been excluded just years earlier. The fastest way to be banned from the sport is now discrimination of any kind. But this story isn't just about Formula One, it's about something much bigger, the power of one person to change everything. Maria Santos proved that you don't need to be rich, famous, or powerful to make a difference. You just need to be brave enough to stand up for what's right, even when everyone else is looking the other way. The lesson here transcends in boardrooms, classrooms, and communities around the world. There are people witnessing injustice and staying silent. Maria's story reminds us that the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't money or influence. It's the courage to document truth and the persistence to pursue justice. If you've made it this far, and statistics show only 3% of viewers watch until the end, then you're part of something special. You're someone who believes that truth matters more than comfort, that justice delayed is still worth fighting for. Comment "Justice always wins" if this story reminded you that one person really can change the world. Every comment helps spread this message to someone who might need to hear it today. When you subscribe to this channel, you're not just following another YouTube page. You're joining a community that believes in holding the powerful accountable. We have hundreds of stories like this one, stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things when faced with injustice. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters. Tag someone who's ever felt invisible or powerless, because if Maria Santos taught us anything, it's that the most dangerous person to corruption is someone who everyone underestimates. This story changed Formula One forever, but more importantly, it proved a timeless truth. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, especially when brave people are willing to help it along. Your next act of courage might be the one that changes everything.